John had always dreamed of the perfect home, a quiet neighborhood, tree-lined streets, and a backyard oasis where he could escape after long work days. When he finally closed on his new house, the late spring sun glimmered off the crystal-clear pool nestled behind the white picket fence. It wasn't just a pool, it was his pool, part of the property he had painstakingly saved for and bought outright. Life couldn't be better. For weeks, John spent evenings floating lazily in the water, grilling on weekends and chatting with neighbors who waved politely from their porches. It was the suburban dream. Until that morning. John stepped outside, coffee in hand, ready to start the day with a quick swim. But something was wrong. The pool gate, which had always stood open or with an easy latch, was now firmly chained shut, a heavy padlock gleaming ominously in the early sunlight. His brow furrowed. Who would do this? And why? He tugged at the chain, locked tight. No note, no explanation, only the quiet neighborhood sounds. Birds chirping, distant lawnmowers, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. John's pulse quickened. He scanned the perimeter, half expecting to see someone nearby, watching or waiting. No one. Just his locked gate, a barrier he had never imagined facing. He tried to remain calm. Maybe it was a mistake, a prank, or some new rule from the HOA he hadn't been told about yet. But then, the letter arrived. Sliding under the front door like an unwelcome secret, the crisp white envelope bore the embossed seal of the HOA. John's heart sank as he tore it open. The words inside were cold and formal, a stark contrast to the warm spring day. Dear Mr. Thompson, due to violations of the community's pool access policies, your privileges have been suspended indefinitely. Effective immediately, you are no longer permitted to use the community pool facilities. Further access attempts may result in penalties as outlined in the HOA regulations. Please contact the HOA office for clarification. John blinked, rereading the words. Violations? He had never received any warnings, fines, or complaints. He'd paid every fee on time, followed every rule he knew. The letter gave no details, no way to appeal. Just an order to stay out. His mind raced. Was this some sort of bureaucratic mistake? Or was there something more personal behind the move? John remembered the HOA president, Laura, a woman known for her strict enforcement of rules and an iron grip on the neighborhood board. They'd exchanged polite nods but never words, no reason for her to single him out. He called the HOA office immediately, but the receptionist was curt and unhelpful, directing him to send an email instead. No one answered his calls for days. Meanwhile, whispers started to ripple through the neighborhood. At the grocery store, a neighbor casually mentioned that Laura had been cracking down on rule breakers. At the gym, someone hinted at a power struggle within the HOA, but no one would say more. John felt the walls closing in. The pool, once a symbol of freedom and joy, had become a fortress denying him his right. Locked out not by law, but by an invisible hand he couldn't yet see. Determined not to be pushed aside, John vowed to get to the bottom of it. He had bought his home fair and square, and the pool was part of his property rights. But what he didn't know yet was that this fight was about to become more complicated and personal than he could have ever imagined. Days passed, but John's pool gate remained locked tight, the cold metal chain mocking him each time. He glanced outside. The sun was high and warm, perfect for swimming, yet he was confined to dry land, trapped by rules that felt invisible and unjust. His unanswered calls to the HOA office gnawed at him. Frustration mounting, John decided to visit the HOA headquarters in person. Maybe a face-to-face conversation would get through the bureaucracy. What he didn't expect was the hostile reception that awaited him. The office was a small, unassuming building at the end of the cul-de-sac, with a neatly trimmed lawn and a flag fluttering outside. John stepped inside, hopeful. But the receptionist, A middle-aged woman with a sharp expression barely looked up from her paperwork. "I'm here to talk to the HOA president about the pool access restriction on my property," John said, trying to keep his tone calm. She glanced at him coldly. "Ms. Lawrence isn't available. If you have questions, submit them in writing." John's jaw tightened. "I've already sent emails. No response." "Board meetings are the appropriate forum," she replied, voice clipped. "The next one is Thursday evening. Attendance is open." John left, feeling dismissed and more alone than ever. But he wasn't about to give up. That Thursday, John arrived early at the HOA meeting, a gathering of homeowners sitting stiffly in folding chairs inside the community center. The atmosphere was tense, with murmurs filling the room as neighbors whispered about recent disputes. When the meeting began, Laura Lawrence, the HOA president, took the podium with an air of authority. That commanded silence. Her sharp eyes scanned the crowd before landing on John. "Mr. Thompson," she began coolly, "I understand you have concerns about pool access. However, as the board president, I must enforce the community's policies." John raised his hand. "Ms. Lawrence, I own my property outright. The pool is part of that property. What violation justifies locking me out without warning?" Laura's lips tightened. "The pool is a community amenity, subject to the HOA's rules. Access requires adherence to our policies, including dues and behavior standards. Your recent actions—" "My recent actions?" John interrupted. "I haven't received any notice of violations. Please be specific." A hush fell over the room. Laura's expression hardened. "This isn't the place for detailed discussions. The board has determined you're not in compliance. You may appeal by submitting a formal request in writing." John felt the weight of the room's cold stares. Some neighbors avoided eye contact. Others watched with thinly veiled curiosity or disapproval. The power Laura wielded was undeniable. After the meeting, John lingered, hoping to speak with Laura privately, but she disappeared behind a closed door, leaving him with a chilling sense of finality. Determined to find answers, John returned home and pored over his property documents, HOA bylaws, and community guidelines he'd been given at closing. Hours turned into a late night as he searched for anything that could explain the sudden ban. He found plenty of rules about pool hours, guest limits, and safety regulations, none of which he had ever violated. Then, in the back of a thick binder, he discovered a reference to a membership requirement that vaguely stated, "Only owners who pay the community recreational fees shall have pool privileges." John's brow furrowed. He had paid every fee listed in his closing paperwork. What was this recreational fee he'd never heard of? The next morning, he called the HOA office again, demanding clarification. This time, a different voice answered. A man who identified himself only as the board's treasurer. "Mr. Thompson," the voice said, "the recreational fee is separate from your standard HOA dues. It was implemented last year. If you haven't paid it, your pool access is revoked." John's heart sank. He had never been notified of this new fee. "Why wasn't I informed?" "We send notices to all homeowners," the treasurer replied, smoothly. "You must have missed it." John knew better. It felt like a trap, an excuse to exclude him. But who stood to gain from this exclusion? And why target him specifically? The deeper John dug, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about pool access. It was about control, and someone was pulling strings to keep him out. John stood outside the community center once more, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the parking lot. He felt the weight of every locked gate, every closed door in this neighborhood bearing down on him. Today wasn't just about pool access anymore. It was about standing up for his rights and uncovering the truth behind the HOA's sudden hostility. Inside, neighbors trickled into the small meeting room, filling folding chairs with cautious faces. Some whispered about the recent drama, others avoided eye contact, but all seemed aware something was brewing. John spotted a few familiar faces. Friendly neighbors who once waved warmly but now looked wary. The undercurrent of tension was palpable. When the meeting began, Laura Lawrence took the podium with the same steely composure that had frustrated John before. She wasted no time addressing the elephant in the room. "Tonight we will discuss the community's recreational policies," she announced. "As president, I must ensure that our rules are followed to maintain fairness and safety for all residents." John's pulse quickened. This was his chance. When the floor opened for questions, John stepped forward. "Ms. Lawrence, I still don't understand why I've been denied access to the pool. I own my property, I've paid my HOA dues, and I was never notified about this recreational fee you mentioned. Why was I locked out without warning or explanation?" Laura's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Thompson, the recreational fee is a voluntary program designed to maintain the pool and facilities. Those who choose not to participate forfeit access." "That's not true," John shot back, feeling a surge of frustration. "When I bought my home, pool access was included. You can't just change the rules without informing owners or honoring previous agreements." The room grew quieter as neighbors leaned in. Laura's tone sharpened. "Policies evolve, Mr. Thompson. The board voted on this last year. You were informed through community newsletters and emails." John shook his head. "I never received any of those notices. You're excluding me on a technicality, but it feels personal." Laura's lips curled into a cold smile. "This is about community standards, not personal vendettas." Just then, a voice called from the back. It was Linda, an older resident, known for her sharp memory and community involvement. "Excuse me," Linda said, stepping forward. "I don't recall seeing any newsletter about this new fee. If it was sent, I missed it too. Many of us don't use email regularly." Laura dismissed her with a wave. "The notices were posted on the community website." Murmurs spread. The digital-only notice felt like an easy way to keep homeowners in the dark. John pressed on. "So, it's a secret fee, and those who don't check the website get locked out? That's not fair, and it's not legal." Laura's expression darkened. "The board has acted within its authority." Suddenly, another neighbor, Mark, a younger man who had been silent, stood up. "Laura, this isn't just about fees. I've heard rumors that certain homeowners are being targeted. John, you're not the only one locked out without clear reason." The room shifted uncomfortably. John's suspicion deepened. This was bigger than he thought. Then, Laura made a surprising move. "The board will conduct a review of all pool access cases. In the meantime, Mr. Thompson's access remains suspended." John felt the room closing in again. A temporary victory, but no real resolution. As the meeting ended, Laura approached him quietly, her voice low and warning. "Be careful, John. Sometimes digging too deep stirs things better left alone." John met her gaze, unwavering. "I'm not going anywhere." Outside, the night air was cool but charged with tension. John knew this confrontation was only the beginning. Behind Laura's polite facade was a determination to control, to keep power tightly held. And John was about to find out just how far she'd go and what secrets the HOA was desperate to keep buried. The night after the HOA meeting, John sat at his kitchen table, the glow of his laptop illuminating a growing sense of determination and unease. Laura's warning echoed in his mind. Sometimes digging too deep stirs things better left alone. But John wasn't about to back down. Not now, when the truth seemed just within reach. He pulled out the thick binder of documents he'd received when purchasing the home. Property deeds, HOA bylaws, and a mountain of paperwork. For hours, John sifted through the legal language, looking for any hint that might explain the pool dispute or give him leverage. He had already found mention of the recreational fee, but the details were vague and buried deep in fine print. Then, just as he was about to give up for the night, he noticed a small folder tucked at the back of the binder, marked Community. Amendments. Confidential. His heart raced. He hadn't seen this before. Why was it hidden away? With trembling hands, John opened the folder and found a series of typed pages. Amendments to the HOA's governing documents, some handwritten, notes, and a map outlining the property lines and community facilities. As he read, the pieces started to fall together, but they didn't fit the picture Laura had painted. One amendment, dated nearly 15 years ago, caught his eye. It detailed a transfer of certain property rights related to the pool and surrounding amenities, rights that John realized with a jolt were not held by the HOA, but by a private trust controlled by a small group of residents. The trust's existence was never mentioned in official communications. Could this explain why Laura and the board had such tight control over pool access? Were they acting not just as HOA leaders, but as gatekeepers for a private interest? John's pulse quickened as he cross-referenced the map with his own property lines. According to these documents, the pool area wasn't technically part of the HOA's common property at all. It belonged to the trust, and the trust had the authority to restrict access. The realization hit hard. John had been fighting the wrong enemy. This wasn't about routine HOA policies or forgotten fees. It was a deeper power struggle, one hidden behind layers of secrecy and legal jargon. He scrolled through the handwritten notes. One phrase stood out, scribbled in the margin of a page. Keep ownership details confidential to prevent disputes. John felt a cold chill. Why the secrecy? What disputes were they trying to avoid? Suddenly, a knock at the door startled him. John glanced up, but through the window no one was there, just the quiet street and the flicker of porch lights down the road. He shook off the unease and locked the door. But the feeling of being watched lingered. It was as if someone, or something, was monitoring his every move. Determined to act, John decided he needed professional advice. Early the next day, he scheduled a meeting with a real estate attorney, hoping to make sense of the tangled web he'd uncovered. At the law office, John spread the documents across the conference table. The attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Ms. Ramirez, leaned forward, her expression serious as she examined the amendments. "This is unusual," she said finally. "A private trust holding pool property within an HOA community isn't common, but it's not unheard of. The trust's rights supersede the HOA's, which means they can legally control who uses the pool." John frowned. But why keep it hidden? And why would the HOA president act like it's a simple fee issue when there's a deeper ownership problem? Ms. Ramirez paused. Sometimes, power is maintained through secrecy. If the trust members want to exclude certain owners for personal or political reasons, they can do so under the guise of enforcing rules. It's a legal gray area. John felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This was no longer just a fight for pool access. It was a battle against a secretive power structure entrenched in his community, one that could strip his rights away under layers of fine print and silence. As he left the attorney's office, John resolved to uncover who was behind the trust and what their true motives were. The deeper he dug, the more dangerous it seemed, and someone in the shadows was watching closely, waiting to see if he would stop or push forward. John's discovery of the secret trust sent a chill through his veins, but it also fueled his determination. The pool was more than just a place to swim. It was a symbol of ownership and freedom in his own home. Yet now he understood the game he was up against was far more complex and far more dangerous than he'd imagined. For the next few days, John kept a low profile, gathering every piece of information he could about the trust and the key players involved. He combed through public records, spoke with neighbors cautiously, and even reached out to a former HOA board member who had stepped down under mysterious circumstances. Then, just as he began to piece together the network of influence controlling the pool, the first warning arrived. It was a plain envelope, slipped under his door late one evening. Inside was a single typed page. Mr. Thompson, cease your inquiries immediately. Your actions are causing unnecessary disruption and will have consequences. It would be in your best interest to drop this matter and avoid further conflict. Consider this your only warning. No signature, no official letterhead, just a cold, ominous message. John's hands trembled as he read the note again. A threat. But from whom? The HOA? The trust? Or someone else entirely? He weighed his options. Ignoring it could mean escalating danger, but backing down would be surrendering his rights and letting secrecy and control win. The next day, John drove to the community pool, hoping to find a friendly face or some clue. The gates were still locked, the padlock gleaming like a sentinel. He noticed a faint shadow moving behind the bushes nearby, but when he looked closer, no one was there. A creeping sense of paranoia settled in. Was someone following him, watching his every move? Back home, John found his mailbox emptied. His usual community newsletters and personal mail were gone. Someone had been going through his things. His phone buzzed with an unknown number. He answered, heart pounding. "Mr. Thompson," a distorted voice whispered, "you don't want to make enemies here. Drop this now, or things will get ugly." Click. John's blood ran cold, but this only strengthened his resolve. He called his lawyer, Ms. Ramirez, and explained the situation. She urged caution, but confirmed that threats, especially anonymous ones, were taken seriously and could be reported to the authorities. John debated whether to involve the police. Would they believe him? Would the HOA or trust retaliate more fiercely? Meanwhile, rumors began to swirl among neighbors. Some whispered that John was stirring up trouble. Others expressed quiet sympathy, but no one openly sided with him. The community seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see who would break first. Then, an unexpected message arrived from Linda, the elderly neighbor who had spoken up at the HOA meeting. "John," her note read, "be careful. There's more to this than you realize. I can help, but it's risky." That night, John met Linda at a quiet cafe. She leaned in, voice low and urgent. The trust controlling the pool? It's not just about money or fees. It's about control. Who gets to belong and who doesn't. Laura Lawrence and a few others have been keeping this power for years. They're ruthless. John's mind raced. If Laura was just the face, who were the others? What had they done to maintain control for so long? Linda hesitated before continuing. Some people tried to fight back before, but they disappeared from the neighborhood, moved away, sold their homes. No one talks about why. A shiver ran down John's spine. This was no ordinary HOA dispute. It was a shadow war over control, with real consequences. As he left the cafe, John glanced over, his shoulder. The quiet street suddenly felt darker, filled with unseen eyes and whispered threats. But John was ready. If this fight meant risking everything, his home, his peace, even his safety, he was prepared to stand his ground. Because sometimes, justice demanded courage in the face of danger. The following morning, John woke with a renewed sense of purpose, but also a heavy weight of anxiety. The anonymous threat still echoed in his mind like a dark warning. But Linda's words had sparked something deeper, a hope that he wasn't alone in this fight. He reached for his phone and dialed Linda's number. "I want to help," John said firmly. "If there are others who've been pushed out or silenced, I want to find them. We need allies." Linda's voice was cautious but encouraging. "Meet me at my house tonight. I'll introduce you to a few people who might be willing to talk, Unbai." Agreed, feeling a flicker of relief. It was dangerous to go it alone, especially against a powerful network hiding behind legal documents and veiled threats. He knew he needed more than just determination. He needed a coalition. The day dragged on, his mind racing through strategies and worst-case scenarios. Every knock at the door or car passing slowly down the street made him jump. He double-checked. His locks, installed a security camera outside, and even thought about moving temporarily, but then shook his head. This was his home, and he wouldn't be driven out by intimidation. As evening fell, John drove cautiously to Linda's house, a cozy cottage nestled near the edge of the neighborhood. The porch light cast long shadows, but the warmth of a few. Welcoming faces greeted him inside. There he met 3 other homeowners: Mark, the younger man who had spoken at the HOA meeting; Susan, a mother of 2 who had quietly voiced frustration about the community's secrecy; and George, a retired engineer who had lived in the neighborhood for over 20 years. Each shared their story. How Laura and the board had subtly tightened control over the years, introducing fees, rules, and restrictions without proper transparency. Some had resisted and paid a social price, frozen out of community events, whispered about behind their backs, or, like Linda warned, quietly pushed to sell their homes. John listened intently, realizing the problem was systemic, a tightly knit group wielding power behind the scenes, using the trust and the HOA as tools to maintain exclusivity. But there was more. Mark leaned forward. There's one thing no one talks about: the trust's origin. It was created decades ago by a handful of families who wanted to control the neighborhood's growth and character. Over time, it became a weapon. Susan nodded. And Laura isn't just president. She's related to one of the founding families. It's all connected. The room grew heavy with unspoken fear. Challenging this wasn't just about pool access, it was about shaking the foundations of a hidden empire. John felt a mix of dread and resolve. He was now part of something bigger, a movement to reclaim their community. Linda pulled out a small binder. We've been collecting documents, emails, anything that shows how the board manipulates rules and hides information. We're planning to petition the county for an investigation. John's heart pounded. This was risky, but it was the only way forward. Just then, his phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. Stop digging or you'll regret it. This is your final warning. The room fell silent. George broke the tension with a grim smile. Looks like they're watching. John took a deep breath. Fear was real, but so was the truth. If we back down now, they win, he said firmly. We have to fight, Linda nodded. And we will. Together. As John left Linda's house that night, the streetlights flickered ominously, and a cold wind whispered through the trees. The neighborhood looked peaceful, but beneath its surface, a storm was gathering. John was ready to face it, no matter the cost. The days following the secret meeting passed in a blur of cautious preparation and whispered planning. John's world had narrowed to a single mission: expose the shadowy trust controlling the community and reclaim his rightful access to the pool and to his own home's freedoms. With Linda and the others by his side, John started compiling their evidence into a formal petition to submit to the county's housing authority. It was a risky move, but one that felt necessary. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that the trust's actions violated transparency laws and homeowners' rights. But power fight's dirty. Late one evening, as John was working at his computer, he heard the crunch of footsteps outside, his front door. Heart racing, he peered through the window to see a figure standing in the shadows. A quick knock echoed against the door, firm, deliberate. John's fingers trembled as he opened the door a crack. "John," a voice whispered. It was Mark. "We need to talk. Now." Relieved, John led him inside. Mark looked grave, his eyes darting nervously toward the street. "They know what we're doing," Mark said. "The board, Laura especially, is scrambling. They've called an emergency meeting. They want to shut this down before the petition reaches the county." John's jaw clenched. "What can we do?" Mark unfolded a folded piece of paper, an invitation marked urgent. All homeowners must attend the emergency HOA meeting tomorrow evening. Attendance is mandatory. John frowned. This was no ordinary meeting. It was a power play. The next evening, John entered the community center feeling the weight of every stare. The room was packed. Neighbors, board members, and those shadowy figures who held the trust's real power. Laura Lawrence stood at the podium, calm and commanding, as if she owned the room. And, for a moment, she did. We understand there. Our concerns about the pool and the recreational fees, she began smoothly. But I want to assure everyone that the board has acted fairly and transparently. John raised his hand. Ms. Lawrence, fairness means informing homeowners honestly. Many of us were never told about fees, changes, or the existence of the trust controlling the pool. That's not transparency. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Laura's eyes locked on John, sharp and cold. We have followed all legal procedures, she said. The trust is a private entity that maintains the pool. The board's actions reflect community consensus. John stepped forward. Consensus? When so many of us have been excluded, silenced, and threatened? When letters warning me to stop digging arrive anonymously? Suddenly, the room shifted. Laura's voice dropped, but it was cutting. Mr. Thompson, your accusations border on defamation. We will not tolerate harassment or disruption of community peace. John glanced around, noticing faces he hadn't seen before. Stern-looking men and women who seemed to silently support Laura's stance. Then, in a move that stunned him, Laura gestured to a man at the back of the room. I'd like to introduce Mr. Collins, legal counsel for the trust. The man stepped forward, a cold smile playing on his lips. Mr. Thompson, Collins said smoothly, your actions have crossed a line. The trust is prepared to take legal action if necessary. This is your final chance to comply or face consequences. John felt the eyes of the room pinning him down. A collective warning. But deep inside, something snapped. No, John said, voice steady. I will not be intimidated. You may have power and money, but the truth will come out. This community deserves honesty and fairness, not control behind closed doors. The tension in the room was electric. Laura's face was a mask, but John saw the flicker of something else. Fear. Suddenly the lights flickered. For a moment, the room was plunged into darkness. When the emergency lights kicked in, a loud crash came from outside. The pool gate forcibly broken. Gasps echoed through the crowd. John exchanged a glance with Mark and Linda. The fight was no longer just legal or political. It had turned personal and dangerous. Laura's cold facade cracked, her voice trembling slightly. Security, please! As board members hurried to regain control, John knew this was only the beginning. The pool and his home had become the battleground for a much larger war, and he was ready to fight until the very end. The shattered gate lay twisted and broken, a vivid symbol of the turmoil now gripping the neighborhood. The emergency lights cast harsh glows on the faces of anxious homeowners as security personnel hurried to assess the damage. But amidst the chaos, John felt a strange calm, a clarity that came from standing firmly for what was right. After the meeting, the tension outside didn't ease. John, Mark, and Linda gathered quietly on the cracked sidewalk, whispering urgently. We can't let this intimidation stop us, Linda said, her voice steady but low. It's proof they're afraid. John nodded. And now we know they'll escalate. We have to be ready. Over the next days, John's petition to the County Housing Authority gained momentum. The neighbors who once hesitated to speak now came forward, sharing their stories of exclusion, manipulation, and fear. The county opened a formal investigation into the HOA and the mysterious trust controlling the pool. But the biggest surprise came in the form of a letter John received one morning, from none other than Laura Lawrence herself. The letter was brief, but unexpected. John, I know this fight has caused pain and suspicion, But the truth about the trust is more complicated than you realize. Meet me at the pool pavilion tomorrow at noon. We need to talk, openly and honestly. Curious and cautious, John agreed. The next day, he arrived at the pool pavilion to find Laura already there, sitting alone beneath the shade of a large umbrella. Her demeanor was different, less cold, more reflective. "I wanted to explain," she began, her voice softer than he'd ever heard. "The trust was created decades ago by families who wanted to protect the community's character from unchecked development. It wasn't meant to exclude or intimidate." John listened carefully, skeptical, but willing to hear her out. Over time, Laura continued, the trust became too secretive and its leaders, including me, lost sight of the original purpose. Power corrupted us. The fees, the restrictions, even the threats, they were mistakes. John's surprise was genuine. "You're saying you regret all of it?" "Yes," Laura admitted, "and I want to fix it. That's why I reached out. I can help dissolve the trust and work with the county to restore transparency." For a long moment, John searched her face, looking for any sign of deception. But there was none. Just honesty and an unexpected offer of alliance. The next weeks brought dramatic changes. Under county supervision, the trust was formally dissolved. Its control over the pool and community amenities transferred back to the HOA, now required to operate with full transparency and fair policies. Laura stepped down as president, replaced by a board elected by the community with clear mandates to rebuild trust and unity. John was granted full access to the pool, and more importantly, a voice in shaping the neighborhood's future. But the story didn't end there. At the community's first open meeting under the new board, Linda raised a question that had haunted many. How did the trust's secrets stay hidden for so long? And who benefited the most from keeping them in the dark? The answer came from an unlikely source. George, the retired engineer who had quietly observed everything. Some of the founding families profited from exclusive contracts, inflated fees, and controlling property values, George revealed. It was a system designed to protect privilege, not community. The revelation rocked the neighborhood, but also united it. John realized that the battle for his pool access had uncovered a larger truth, that ownership was not just about property lines, but about who had the courage to stand up for fairness. And in that courage, the community found new strength. As summer warmed the days, John swam freely in the pool, surrounded by neighbors who now saw each other not as adversaries, but as partners. The gates were open, the water clear, and the shadows of the past finally washed away.